So let's go ahead and get started. I'm excited. So we're going to jump into stories now. And so the story this week is pretty wild. Some of you may have heard of this in the news, but it's about Gawker Media. So if you haven't heard of Gawker before, so Gawker was a journalist news company. It was kind of like one of the hot blogs that started in like the early 2000s and just started as a journalist news blog. But it was mostly like, it was kind of like breaking news, kind of investigative journalism, but also just a lot of like scandalous stuff like celebrity sex tapes and like, you know, what's going on between two celebrity relationships and, you know, just stuff like that. That was, you know, basically just posting articles. It was news, it was journalism in a way, but it was also very much like in your face, like just wanting to get people's attention, like clickbait headlines and, you know, you wouldn't believe what these celebrities did this week and that kind of stuff, right? And so it's founded by this guy named Nick Denton. And so the company grew really fast. And so like, you know, 10 years after it was founded, it was doing like $25 million a year in revenue. And it was a massive force. They had lots of different websites, lots of, you know, hundreds or maybe even thousands of writers working for them. It was a really big company. And what happened was they made a lot of people angry, right? Like, and they hurt a lot of people. And they did it, you know, for a lot of reasons, but basically their whole goal, their whole mission was they would measure each writer, they would measure how much traffic they would get to the website, right? So like, Farrah, if you got 10 million views, you get paid a certain amount. And if you got 30 million views, you'd be paid like 3 times as much, right? And so they kind of created this culture where like everyone was just trying to score more points, right? And if you got a big article, like it didn't matter what you did, if you got like another 10 million views this week, like everyone high-fived you, you got a big bonus. Like that's what the culture was like, right? So even though it was like journalism, their whole goal, like their whole ethos, their whole culture was all about just how do we get bigger numbers? Like how do we get more people to the website? It doesn't matter what you have to do it, do whatever it takes, just get more traffic to the website. And because of the way that culture was, and also because they had this very like in your face, like snarky, sarcastic attitude, they ended up making a lot of people angry and like hurting a lot of people, right? So I know there's like this one example of, you know, there was a young woman in college and there's a tape of her like probably being raped, and they posted it online. And when she emailed them and said, hey, please take this down, it's like ruining my life, like her dad emailed them, please take this down, they were just like, oh, it'll pass, don't worry about it, right? So even though they were hurting people and like ruining people's lives, they just said, hey, we're getting more pages, we're getting more money, we're just going to do it anyways. And they treated people with contempt. And I'll talk about that more and why that's so bad, but like they just treated people really badly and they didn't care about the results of their actions, right? So they had this philosophy that the truth is all that mattered, right? If they posted a story online and it was true, that's all that mattered, right? So they had this ideology. And ideology is like a belief that like if you just have this one thing, everything will be perfect, right? Like socialists believe, like, you know, if you just have, you know, everything owned, shared equally amongst everyone in society, everything's gonna be perfect, right? Or in Gawker, it was like, you know, if we always post the truth and we always say what's true, then everything's gonna be okay. And we talked about at another meeting, like how truth is so important. And I think we all agree that truth is a really important thing. But we also talked about like there's this line, right? Like you don't say things that are true just to hurt someone else, or you have to understand the effects of your actions, right? So you have to understand that what you do impacts other people. Like the work you do at TSK Publishing impacts other people. How you live your life impacts other people. Like everything you do is not just about you; it's also about other people in your life, right? And so there's this company with this culture where they didn't have that. The guiding principle for them wasn't what's the right thing to do. It was how do we get more page views and is it true, right? And as it turns out, those were really dangerous principles for a company. Right. So what happened is they made a lot of people upset, including one billionaire named Peter Thiel. And in fact, he got so upset with them and he was so convinced that they were actually making the world worse, that they were actually hurting more people than they were helping. He got so convinced that he decided he was going to do whatever it took to destroy the company. And so basically what happened is he hired an attorney to look at what was going on with the company and see if there are any legitimate lawsuits. And there were lots. Like there were lots of people suing Gawker because they were breaking the law. Like, for example, they were publishing sex tapes that were like illegally taken, right? It was like clearly a violation of law and clearly unethical. And they were doing it. So anyways, this billionaire funded these lawsuits, and eventually Hulk Hogan sued the company and won a judgment for like $100 million, and the company went bankrupt. Everyone lost their jobs, and the company was over, right? So, I mean, there's so many things about the story about, it's like, is it ethical for a billionaire to fund lawsuits against a company to destroy it and all these things? But the interesting thing to me about it is like reading the story. There's a book called Conspiracy about the whole story by Ryan Holiday, I believe. And I just read it this week, and it was so fascinating. But the thing that was really clear to me from watching the story was like, it was inevitable. It was inevitable that the company was going to be destroyed, right? It was inevitable that it was not going to be a lasting, sustainable company. And the reason is because when you look at their ideology, when you look at how they were doing things, when you look at how everyone in the company was aligned, they were going somewhere in a direction that was headed for disaster, right? They were headed for disaster. So if it wasn't Hulk Hogan, if it wasn't Peter Thiel, it would have been some other lawsuit. It would have been some other problem, because again, they weren't guided by what is the right thing to do. They were guided by these other ideas, right, that were dangerous. And so they had this concept that like people's emotions don't matter, right? Like, you can post anything you want, publish anything you want. It doesn't matter how it impacts other people. It doesn't matter how other people think or how other people feel. And one of my beliefs that I've come across recently by a lot of study and research and reflection is that like other people's experience of you are actually like the most real thing in the world, right? It's like there's two ways to look at the world. One is like this materialistic scientific point of view, which is like, there's a computer here, and there's atoms, and there's the physical world, and that all that matters is the physical world, right? So if I get enough money and I get a big house and I get a big car and I get everything in the physical world just perfect, my life will be great. And there's the other perspective of like, then there's like what this internal world, right? And inside of you, like your emotions, your feelings, your experience of the world. And I'm sure we all have seen people or heard about people who, have all the physical world figured out. They have all the money in the world. They have everything they could ever want, but they're miserable inside, right? And so I think that that's what matters the most, is how you feel inside, like what your experience of the world is. And I think that's the thing that matters more to you than anything else in the world. I don't think the money matters as much. I don't think the house matters as much. I don't think the cars matter as much. I think it's your experience of life. Like if you're happy and you love your life and you love your family and you love the work that you do, you're going to have a good life, right? And I think if that's what you believe too, then you also have to understand that the most important thing to other people isn't the physical world, it's also their experience of the world, right? And so if you think the most important thing for you is to not be in pain, to not be suffering, to be happy, to have a good life, then you have to know that that's the best thing for other people too, right? And that means that you have a duty, you have a responsibility to make the world better, to help other people have better lives, or at the very least, to not make their lives intentionally worse, right? Like you don't have to be like a saint, like you don't have to be Gandhi. You don't have to make the world, like fix everything in the world, but like at least the least thing you could do on your journey onto the planet Earth would be like, don't make life worse for other people intentionally, right? And that's not what Gawker did. Like they had these other goals that made them intentionally making people's lives worse because they didn't care about those effects. And I think that's one of the huge parts of this tragedy of the story. And I think that's why the company was destined for failure. So they had this other, because of their ideologies, like they also believed like unethical behavior was okay, right? Like they were doing all this unethical and even illegal behavior because they thought it was okay because they had this ideology. So that's what's so dangerous about having this idea, like having a belief system where you think like one thing is the most important thing. It can be really dangerous because you only focus on that one thing, and then all the effects of your actions, you just say, oh, it doesn't matter that other people get hurt because this is more important, right? That's really dangerous. That's the other kind of mindset, like authority is bad, right? Like there were a lot of young people, like my generation, like millennials, and they just believed that like, the world was corrupt and the world was bad and life is meaningless. And they have this like nihilistic attitude. Like nihilism means like life is meaningless. Like you reject all religion, all tradition. You don't think there's any meaning in life. And they also had, I think, this belief too, like the world was corrupt. Like the world is a bad place. That's what their belief was, right? And maybe they didn't state that publicly, but you can just tell like the way they published articles, like the way they wrote comments, the way they were so contemptuous to people. You can tell that place that was coming from was like this idea, like the world is a bad place. And that is such a dangerous belief. Like that is the worst belief I think you could possibly have for your life. Because if you believe the world is a bad place, if you believe humanity is bad, that people are bad, like some people say things like, humanity is a cancer on the planet. And that is such a dangerous, horrible thing to say, because what do you do with cancer? You kill it, you eradicate it, right? So if you have that belief system, then you're also saying that the best thing to do is to kill people, right? Is to end life on Earth, or to end, society or culture or whatever. Like that's, and it's taking that idea to an extreme, but like that's how ideas work, right? It's like you can't believe that and then also believe that like nuclear war is a bad thing, right? Like those, so it's a really dangerous attitude to have, and I think that's also part of the reason why that organization couldn't last, because like they all had this belief there, or there was this, maybe not everyone, but there's this kind of collective belief there that like the world is a bad place. And like, if you believe the world's a bad place, like why build a big company, right? Like why have a big company that lasts if the world's a bad place? Like there's no point. Like it's completely meaningless. It's counterproductive to what your beliefs are, right? So I think this is a really dangerous belief to have, and I think the right belief to have is that the world is a great place. The world is a wonderful place. Humans are good. And yeah, we have lots of problems, right? Like you cannot deny that humanity has lots of problems. We all have lots of problems, but we're smart and we're strong and we can be wise and we can learn and we can grow and we can solve those problems and we can work together. And we can make the world a better place. And I think that's a much better belief to have for a company, for yourself, for life in general. And this other idea about contempt. And I think contempt is one of the things that, like, it'll ruin your life. It'll ruin your relationships. Like if you hold people in contempt, like if you hate people, like if you're angry at people, like if you, like if someone cuts you off in traffic and you're like, just yelling and losing your temper, and like that's like a sign that like something's really off in your life, right? Like, and they treated people with such contempt, like this young woman who was, treated so horribly, and they just didn't care about her. They didn't care how it affected her life. They didn't care how it ruined her life. If you don't like other people, you will treat them really badly, right? And you will get really bad things will happen in your life if you do that. And I think contempt is something that like we can all kind of have resentment in life. Like, something happens that upsets you, someone does something that like triggers you, and we can all have that. We all get angry sometimes. We all have resentment sometimes. And I think the key to learn from that is like when you start to feel that resentment, when you start to feel that anger, is like just be honest about it, like talk about it, like don't let that build, right? Because it starts with a little bit of resentment. Like someone cuts you off, someone says something nice to you, like a friend, and you could start to resent them a little bit. And then it builds up, and then you're angry at them, and then it builds up, and then you start to like hate them, right? And it's like if you keep ignoring, it's like we were talking about those dragons before. Like if you ignore that, it just builds and builds and builds and gets worse. And I think it's one of the things that happened at Gawker as well. The other thing was that they were completely unwilling to apologize for their mistakes, right? So this whole lawsuit, what actually ended the company with Hulk Hogan, like at any point in time over like a course of like 3, 4, 5 years, they could have just apologized. They never once did. They could have just written a letter on their website. They could have emailed him. They could have given him a phone call. Like at any point in time, they could have stopped the entire company from being destroyed by simply apologizing. It probably would have changed the whole thing. And they never did, which is unbelievable to me. Like I can't even believe that like no one in this company was ever like, hey, let's just send him a sorry letter. I'm sorry. Like how hard is that to just apologize, right? And I think that's, so one of my mentors is a guy named Jim Rohn, and he talked about, there's the great thing about the Bible, he said, was that there's a lot of stories in there. And the good thing about it is that there's examples, people who had good lives. And then there's warnings, people who did bad things and got punished, right? And it's like, this is just a great example of like a warning. This is a warning story, and you can learn from both those. And the other thing Jim Rohn said was, you need to read a book on Gandhi, right? Because you need to learn how great and how wonderful a human being can be, right? Like how good could you be? If you were the best person you could possibly be, how good could you be, right? So read books on great people like Gandhi so you can see how great of a human being you could be. The other thing he said is like, you also need to read a book on Hitler, right? Because you need to see how low and despicable and horrible a human being can be. And that's like the thing that amazed me about Hitler so much is like, he's human, just like me, just like you. Like he was just a human being. And there's this picture of Hitler like holding the arms of a little girl on the train tracks, and like just looks like a sweet old man, like having a nice, wonderful day with a stroll with like his niece or something. Looks like a beautiful thing, just a human being. But then you look at the other things that he did in life, and you can see how horrible and despicable it was, right? And so we can learn, and we should learn, both from the good and the bad, right? And this is a great example of the bad that we can learn from. So obviously, not apologizing, and you can see how bad that can be, like to never apologize, it can just ruin your life, right? And so the lesson from that can be like, hey, anytime I think I probably should apologize, I probably should just do that, right? And just apologize, The other thing they had is like habitual fighting was going on. Like they were constantly like fighting in comments with people. They were constantly like antagonizing people. Like their whole legal strategy was about like bullying people, and they just had this constant like verbal attacks on other people. I think that's another thing I've seen ruin a lot of people's lives, and especially relationships. Like when couples or people or family members, they just fight all the time. It's like, if you keep fighting, eventually it's just going to get worse, right? It's like you're going in the wrong direction. The other thing is that they had this like culture of like, angry, like we talked about before, like just an angry culture, and like they would make decisions emotionally, like based on anger. That's a really bad way to make business decisions or life decisions. It's like when you're really angry, that's not the time you want to be making a big decision about your life, right? Like that's not the right time. You want to cool down, get back to center, get relaxed, and then think about it clearly, and then make a decision. So here's the thing, is like the founder of Gawker, Nick Denton, he started with the vision to make the world a better place. He absolutely started that company with the vision to make the world a better place. And if you look at Hitler too, he also started with the vision to make the world a better place, right? Like, and you have to really get that. Like, you have to really understand. Like, this wasn't like a joke. Hitler wasn't like a joke on making the world a better place. Like, he believed he was making the world a better place, and that was his vision, right? And you really have to understand that. And what that means is like, you can have a vision to make the world better, but the vision isn't enough. It's, what are your actions? What are you doing? How are you behaving? What is the culture you're creating, right? So his actions didn't align with his vision, right? And you have to look at the results. What are the results of your action? And are they leading towards making the world a better place actually? Or is that just a fantasy, right? Are you really deluding yourself? Here's another wild thing about the story is that, so at one point in time, they actually took down one of the sex tapes, and a whole bunch of people at the company left. They quit. They were so angry that the founder of the company took down one of those sex tapes that they quit in protest, because they were so stuck in that ideology that they thought any backtracking from that ideology to make other people's lives better was such a horrible thing that they were going to quit. And that's just like shocking to me, because it's like, that's exactly what you want to have happen, right? Like if you take an action at a company to do the right thing and people quit because they're so upset you did the right thing, you don't want those people at your company. You don't want those people in your life, right? And you probably had situations like this with your friends or family, people in your life, when you made a decision to do the right thing and people were upset at you because they wanted to make fun of you or they thought it was stupid or silly or whatever, but you knew in your heart it was the right thing to do. Then that's when you know, like, those people are not the right people to be in your life, right? Because they don't align with your vision to make the world a better place and to do the right thing. Here's the other thing about the company is, like, they had this vision to make the world a better place, but like their plan to make the world a better place wasn't working, right? Like whatever plan they had to do that, it clearly was not producing the results that they wanted. And that's one thing you have to do, like at a company in your own life when you set goals. Like when you have a vision and you want to do something, then you make a plan and then you start implementing the plan. And like, if it's so clear the plan is not working, like you have to change, right? And I think it's whatever was going on there, they didn't have this process to see, like, well, is their plan working or not? Because the plan was clearly not working with their goals, with their vision. Because the other thing is, you have to be responsible for your own actions, right? You are responsible for your own actions. So if you're working at a company, if you're in a part of a group and they decide to do something that you know is wrong, you can't just use the excuse, oh, well, everyone in the group was doing it. Everyone else was doing it. You're responsible for your own actions. I think the other way to look at it too is, like, we're also responsible for other people's actions, right? Like looking at it from that perspective, like that I'm responsible for each of you, right? And if someone on the team does something wrong to hurt other people, I'm responsible, right? Because it's my team, it's my family, it's my community, right? And I want to make sure that we're going in the right direction, that we're making the world a better place. And so it doesn't mean that it's my fault in that sense, but it's the responsibility from the sense of I have a duty to all of you and to the world to make sure that all of us are aligned with that vision to make the world better, right? And that our actions back that up, and that our plans back that up, and that what we do backs that up, right? I think that responsibility was clearly missing from Gawker. It was a whole bunch of people without responsibility. It was a whole bunch of people who were just following the system, getting the page views, doing whatever to follow that ideology, but they weren't being responsible for their actions. The other thing is they could never admit there was a problem, right? Like even when the lawsuit was looming and they were about to go bankrupt, the chief of their legal team at the company, the president of the company, was didn't even know the name of the person suing them. They were about to go bankrupt, and the person responsible for protecting the company from lawsuits didn't even know the name of the guy who was going to make them bankrupt. That audacity, that arrogance is mind blowing, right? It's like if you're responsible for something at a company, you better know what's going on, right? Like you have to know what's going on. You have to take that responsibility. You have to look into it. If someone says there's a problem, you have to look into it. When Maria sends me complaints from authors, I look into it. I don't just ignore it, right? It's like you have to look into it. What's really going on, and are we really doing something wrong? And if so, let's change it. Let's make it better. Because of Gawker's ideology, they literally believe that if they posted an article that caused nuclear war, as long as what they said in the article was true, it was okay, right? That's taking their ideology to the extreme, right? If they posted something that ended humanity, it's okay because it's true, right? You can see how absurd that is when you take that to the logical extreme. It's just wild. So here's something we can really learn from this is you affect other people. Everyone in the company is affecting everyone else. The leadership of the company is affecting everyone else, right? It's and if you act well, the people around you will act better, right? If you take care of your life really well, if you are really great with your family will be better. They'll treat you better. They'll treat everyone else in their family better. They'll treat everyone else in their community better, right? It's a lot of people, when I was growing up, there's a lot of people this idea, and I actually had this ideology too when I was a teenager. It was what I do doesn't matter. It's I can't change the world. I'm just, a kid. I'm just one person. There's 7 billion of us on the planet. I can't make the world better. I can't do anything. But when you really start to look at how life works, you affect everyone in your life. And if you act better, if you do better, if you treat people better, it's going to impact everyone in your life, and they're going to impact everyone in their life. At the same time, if you act poorly, it's going to hurt everyone in your life, right? If you're addicted to alcohol, if you're, damaging your life, if you're ruining your life, it's going to impact your family. It's going to impact your friends. It's going to impact everyone you know. It's going to impact the company, right? And their actions are going to be slightly worse, right? Because you can't have, right? It's this ripple effect. There's this Buddhist concept that life is this giant spider web, and we're all just little parts on that spider web. And every time we do something, it impacts everything else in the whole web of life, right? And I think that's a great way to look at the world, because I think that's true. So if we act better, everyone else will act better. If we act worse, everyone else will act worse. And so even though you're just one human being, the direction of the world is on you, right? Isn't that such a cool concept? Literally, if you just act better, if I can just do a little bit better, I can make everyone else in the world better. Just a little bit, maybe just a little bit, but it matters. And I think that's what the culture is about, right? It's what is the culture of the company? What is the culture of your family? What is the culture of your community? It matters so much, I'm telling you. And it's one of the things that I'm really focused on here is I want us to have a great culture. I want us to have a culture where we are growing and learning and making the world better, and we're supporting each other, and we're doing good. We're aligned for what's really good. We're looking at the effects of our actions and saying, is this really making the world better? If not, we got to change, because that's the most important thing, is making the world better. So I hope this story is helpful for you, and hope you learned a lot from it. So we're going to do a brief writing exercise now. So I want to talk a little bit about what you said about like being afraid of like, bothering people and giving too much feedback and talking too much, asking too many questions. Because I know a lot of you have had the same kind of concern. The thing is, like, communication is one of the hardest things we ever do as human beings. Like, it's really tough to communicate well. Like, we're in the business of like communication, right? Because we help people write great books, right? And so all of editing is really about helping people communicate better, right? Here's the thing: is like no matter how hard you try, there's always going to be miscommunication. All kinds of things can happen, right? So where miscommunication happens, so you have to just be aware that like miscommunication can happen all the time. And so over communication is like the best thing to do. Like, if you're not sure, it's your duty to communicate, right? Like, it's your duty to ask questions if you're not sure. Because otherwise what happens is then you create this culture of like everyone's afraid to ask questions, and like people keep making mistakes because they're not talking about it.